Welcome to Magical Bedtime Stories, your cozy escape into the world of soothing tales and dreamy adventures. Hello, my fellow adventurers. It's Alina, and I'm delighted to welcome you back for another captivating evening of shared tales and thrilling quests. Recently, a viewer recommended that I explore the Dragon Age series, believing it would be a perfect match for me, and they could not have been more accurate. I've been thoroughly enjoying my journey through the games, and am currently on the verge of completing Inquisition, eagerly preparing for the upcoming Veilguard release. This evening, I thought we would begin with a brief primer on the lore, for anyone who might not be familiar with this universe. Then venture into two original tales set within this fascinating world. We will navigate the animated streets of Denirim, swap stories in the dimly lit corners of taverns across Ferelden, and dare to explore the shadowy tunnels of the deep roads, hoping to avoid waking anything we may not be equipped to handle. If you're interested in supporting my efforts and fueling my lyrium craving, please consider visiting my Patreon and donating a sovereign or two. So whether you're a noble Grey Warden, a cunning rogue from Antiva, a formidable mage of the Circle, or simply someone who delights in the thrill of adventure, it's time to grab a tankard of ale or a soothing cup of tea, snuggle up by the hearth, and journey into the enthralling world of Thedas. Together, for those who are already well versed in the Dragon Age lore and its overarching themes, feel free to skip to the next timestamp to dive straight into the stories. However, I would like to provide a concise yet useful overview for those who may be newcomers or in need of a little refresher, ensuring that everyone can relish in the narratives ahead. Now, I would like to provide a concise yet useful overview for those who may be newcomers ahead. Let's turn back time and traverse the centuries, untangling the intricate threads of Thedas' history, where magic, religion, and corruption intertwine to birth the terrifying Darkspawn. At the center of creation is a deity referred to as the Maker, who fashioned the first realm, the Fade, a world brimming with spirits crafted in his image. He resided in a luminous city of his own creation, essentially the seat of heaven within the Fade. However, the Maker soon turned away from his first creations, disappointed because they lacked souls and the capacity to aspire or dream of anything new. In his desire for a more vibrant creation, he forged a second world named Thedas, populated with beings imbued with the divine spark, which pleased him. He cordoned off the two worlds with a veil, yet the first beings gazed longingly across this barrier, harboring envy for their abandonment. Thus came the original sin. The jealous spirits, now known as the Old Gods, whispered to humanity across the veil, luring them into dark worship. Enraged, the Maker imprisoned the Old Gods deep underground, and eventually turned his back on mankind, losing faith in all his. However, fueled by human hubris and desire, mankind continued their worship of these old gods, employing blood magic and forbidden knowledge learned from the Tavern Imperium to gain entry into the Golden City. A second grave sin. The Maker, in his wrath, expelled humanity back to the earth, transforming them into grotesque monsters that became known as the first Darkspawn, corrupting everything they touched. Now the Darkspawn dwell in the deep roads, a subterranean network originally crafted by dwarves. in search of the old gods, those buried beneath the earth. When they discover one, they corrupt it into an archdemon, heralding a blight, an apocalyptic event that threatens to obliterate the world. In the midst of this darkness, hope arises from a band of warriors from various backgrounds, forming the Grey Wardens. An order dedicated to eradicating the blights. Their secret lies in a grisly ritual known as the Joining, where a warden consumes the blood of a darkspawn. Although many do perish in the process, those who survive gain the ability to sense their malevolent foes, albeit at the cost of their own lives, as they gradually succumb to the darkspawn taint within their veins. Throughout history, there have been numerous blights, and with them, the Grey Wardens have stood tall against the tide. Yet blights are not the sole forces impacting Thedas. After the Maker abandoned his creation, chaos ensued. Then emerged Andraste, revered as the bride of the Maker, who rose as a prophet during her time of enslavement, leading a rebellion against the Tevinter Imperium. Guided by visions from the Maker himself, she preached the Chantry of Light, a collection of teachings meant to lead mortals back to the Maker's grace. Though her rebellion succeeded, her mortal existence was betrayed, culminating in her being burned at the stake by enemies. Yet her faith persisted. The Chantry was subsequently formed to promulgate her teachings, serving as the equivalent of a church in the Dragon Age universe. The text of the Chant of Light became sacred with the divine. The leading figure of the Chantry, exerting tremendous influence over nations and people alike. One of the most significant tenets of the chant is the belief that magic is inherently perilous and corrupting, which ultimately birthed the Circles of Magi, a rigid structure aimed at controlling those who wield magic. Mages are overseen by the Templars, military arms devoted to ensuring that mages don't succumb to demonic seductions. Those who undertake the practice of magic outside the circle are deemed apostates and relentlessly hunted. Now let's illuminate a brief status of the dwarves and elves of this world, who find themselves looked down upon at best and outright oppressed at worst, heavily influenced by the Chantry's dogmatic ideals, which claim non-humans need saving due to their perceived deviation from the Maker's grace. Many elves still adhere to the old elven pantheon, whereas dwarves perceive themselves as children of the stone, born from the earth itself, revering the connection they share with the stone, attributing their fortunes and gifts from the universe to her, including the ever-important lyrium, which I will elaborate on shortly. Historically, dwarves boasted numerous underground settlements, known as teagues, connected by a vast network called the Deep Roads. Yet, following relentless incursions by the Darkspawn and several blights, most of these settlements fell to ruin. Currently, dwarves reside chiefly in Orzammar, beneath the Frostback Mountains, an expansive, intricate dwelling carved from stone itself. A few other inhabited teagues exist, such as Karen, but I wish to remain within the scope of our stories for now. Dwarven society is also rigidly hierarchical, with a caste system determining one's social standing from birth. The warrior and smith castes are held in high esteem, while casteless dwarves live in extreme poverty. Interestingly, dwarves cannot dream, removing them from the Fade and rendering them resistant to magic. yet also disconnecting them from spiritual experiences inherently tied to other races within Thedas. In contrast, elves once thrived during a glorious era known as Elven, enjoying immortality and dominion over a vast empire. Unfortunately, with the advent of humans and the consequent rise of the Tevinter Imperium, their civilization crumbled. Nowadays, elves live in poverty or isolation as city elves, mechanically segregated in alien ages, often treated as second-class citizens, or as Dalish elves, who wander the wilds, striving to cling onto remnants of their ancient traditions. Finally, let's discuss lyrium. Lyrium serves as an indispensable conduit for expounded and conjugant inexplainable counsel, hibern, liberate, and serving the inspercell and conduit for its safe extraction and refinement. Additionally, dwarven smiths meticulously enchant their weaponry and armor with lyrium, resulting in exceptional craftsmanship. Lyrium trade remains a critical aspect of Orzammar's economy, and its dealings with the Chantry assure wealth and power, even as dwarven numbers dwindle and their kingdom becomes increasingly isolated. In turn, the Chantry controls this resource to oversee mages. Templars receiving doses of lyrium enabling them to withstand spells and dispel magic, cultivating their ability to track down rogue mages. This dependency often cultivates addiction, resulting in increasingly regrettable actions taken by Templars as they strive to protect their precious supply. Various accounts exist regarding lyrium's nature or origin, each race holding a unique perspective. Dwarves believe they can hear lyrium, deeming it a gift from the stone, while the Chantry believes it to be the emerald waters of the Fade, the essence from which the Maker forged the world, as the sweet sound emitted from raw lyrium is akin to the voice of the Maker. This overview should provide sufficient context regarding the various factions, cultures, and beliefs to fully immerse ourselves in this rich universe. Now, let us dive into our tales, and as always, your input is welcomed, especially regarding anything significant that I may have inadvertently overlooked. I find myself on this journey, still unraveling the stories and fascinated by the lore I encounter. The Missing Apprentices, Chantry story. Sister Seraphine's lantern flickered, casting shadows along the narrow, quiet halls of the Chantry with each step she took. The cold stone floors felt unyielding beneath her feet, while the gloom thickened in hidden corners. Every archway felt imposing, as if the very stones held a silent watch over the sacred space. But tonight, that familiar comfort felt distant from her heart. This marked her fourth night making this same anxious trek, checking on the apprentices. Each time she arrived, their beds lay untouched, a somber testament to their absence. Pushing open the dormitory door, the hinges creaked as they swung to reveal a neat and orderly room. Rows of beds awaited her scrutiny, each one meticulously made, as if none of the apprentices had ever disturbed them before vanishing into the night. Seraphine lingered by the doorway, scanning the scene. Everything that had once felt familiar now felt unbearably empty. A soft sigh slipped from her lips as she pressed a hand to her chest, trying to quell the growing fear that had festered within her for days. What were they doing? Where could they be sneaking off to night after night? The behavior of the apprentices confounded her, pulling her between the desire to protect them and the increasingly urgent temptation to report their unexplained absences. She could already envision herself standing before the revered mother, confessing about her knowledge of the apprentices' nights out, her heart pining under the weight of judgment that would surely come from the mother's stern gaze. The Chantry exhibited little tolerance for disobedience, especially from its young initiates. Example of the idea of discipline served to encourage, inspire, and empower assiduous and Seraphine didn't wish that fate upon them. They were just children, barely comprehending their roles in the Chantry's rigid system. Once she had shared that feeling as an apprentice, full of questions that begged to be answered and restless energy. They deserved better than swift punishment before anyone bothered to understand what was happening. Closing the dormitory door behind her, Seraphine's thoughts began to spin as she walked back through the empty corridors. She was aware she couldn't keep postponing action. The knowledge of the ongoing disappearances would soon circulate, catching the attention of the Templars, who would only bring a swift and heavy-handed resolution that would obliterate her hopes of quietly sorting this out. The fear of the Maker's wrath was always present in those halls, and the Templars often wielded power far too great for these young souls. No, Templars would not be the answer. As she approached her sparsely furnished quarters, Seraphine opened the door, thoughts racing even faster. There was only one person she could confide in, someone who'd consistently seen the truth beneath the rigid doctrines of the Chantry. She moved toward her desk, setting the lantern down beside stacks of parchment, hesitating momentarily before taking up her quill. Years had passed since they had last spoken. So much change lay between them, but his name flowed easily from her mind, as if no time had passed. Her hand felt steady for the first time in days. He was a Grey Warden now, a man forged in battle and burdened by the arduous duty of fighting the Blight. She had followed her path into the Chantry, while he had embarked on an entirely different journey as a warden. Once they had been inseparable, life separating them as was its cruel habit. Yet not so far apart that he wouldn't be willing to help her now. With that resolve, she began to write. The ink flowed in neat, deliberate strokes, and moments later, she signed the letter, sealing it with the Chantry's crest pressed into the wax. Her fingers brushed over the folded parchment. For a fleeting moment, it felt as if years fell away. Ronan would come. He'd never let her down before. Standing from her desk and moving toward the window, she rested her hand on the sill and gazed over the peaceful city of Denerim. It sprawled beneath her, the rooftops jagged against the pale light of the moon. She wondered how time had altered him since they last stood face to face. Had the years of battle strengthened him, or did remnants of the fiery conviction she once knew still dwell within him? Night stretched onward, and the lantern's flame began to sputter. Sleep tugged at her, yet it would not come easily. Her worry lay too openly in her heart. The apprentices meant more to her than mere students. They had become part of her life, entrusted to her care. If anything were to happen, if she failed them, the burden would be one she would carry for eternity. Sister Seraphine knelt by her bedside, clasping her hands together in earnest prayer. "Maker, please watch over them," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. This offered little comfort, but it was all she could do. The Nord Noble Tavern buzzed vibrantly, nearly shaking from the raucous energy of the night. Tucked in one of Denerim's winding streets, the tavern had functioned for years. Yet tonight, the atmosphere felt particularly thick with celebration. Voices carried over the clamor of mugs clinking together, the scraping of chairs, and the occasional sound of dice tumbling across wooden tables. Smoke floated lazily in the dim light from the flickering hearth at the center, and among the revelers sitting around a long, battered table was Ronan Ravencroft, a Grey Warden fresh from victory. His armor, stained with grime from battle, rested against the back of his chair, the weight momentarily lifted from his shoulders. "She goes and hurls her sword at the beast of all things," bellowed Cale, a burly man, his wide grin splitting his face as he slapped the table with glee. "By the Maker, it went right through the beast's eye." Laughter erupted around the table, and Ronan chuckled along with them, although his gaze drifted somewhere beyond the chaos, fingers drumming absent-mindedly against the well-worn wood as he let their banter wash over him. The battle had been arduous, a grueling affair, but for the first time in months there was a breath of fresh air. No darkspawn on the horizon, no urgent missive demanding their presence in yet another conflict. This moment was his to savor. Across from him, Cale leaned back in his chair with the tankard lifted high, calling out, "So, Ronan, what's next for you? Off to slay a dragon, save a village from certain doom?" Amid their cheers, Ronan simply smiled, a slow grin that felt almost tired. "No more dragons," he replied, leaning forward, elbows resting on the tabletop. "I was hoping for something different. Something quieter, perhaps. Maybe I'll take up crafting bows, or..." He pretended to think. "I don't know. A good Falden blade." Pale, another Grey Warden, snorted humorously. "Maybe," Ronan acknowledged, though visions of a quieter life began to take root in his mind. But a man can dream." Ronan reached down, absent-mindedly petting the head of Rook, his beloved Mabari warhound, who sat loyally by his side. The dog's large, dark eyes blinked back at him, and he felt a sense of calm in the steadfastness of his companion's presence. After some time, Ronan arose from the table, his comrades too engrossed in their tales to notice. Slinging his armor over his shoulder, he signaled to Rook, who promptly stood to follow as Ronan strolled toward the door, the tavern's noise fading gently behind him. The cool night air welcomed him as he stepped out onto the cobbled streets of Denerim, the indigo sky above sprinkled with stars. His home was just a short distance away, a modest dwelling snugly situated in the heart of the Grey Warden compound. He cherished this proximity to the energy of the city, yet appreciated the retreat it offered. As he neared his door, Rook sniffed the ground with curious intensity, but Ronan paid it little attention, eager for the comfort of rest after the long night. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open, a familiar sight greeting him upon entering his home, a simple yet inviting space. The hearth at the far end of the room was dark, as the fire had long since gone out. However, the scent of lingering smoke clung to the walls, imbuing it with an air of warmth and tranquility. After tossing his armor onto a nearby bench, Ronan scratched Rook behind the ears, enjoying the comforting rumble the dog made in response. But as he turned toward his bed, something caught his eye. A folded piece of parchment slipped just beneath the door. Curious, he bent to retrieve it, noticing the unmistakable seal of the Chantry pressed into the wax. His curiosity piqued. He carefully broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the words with urgency. A familiar name brought him to a standstill. Sister Seraphine. He furrowed his brow as he read through the letter again. His pace slowed with each line. The letter conveyed her concerns about missing apprentices. An appeal for his assistance as she spiraled into worry. The Templars, as Seraphine had foreseen, were lurking, eager to punish the young children who acted without understanding the consequences of their actions. Ronan sat down on the edge of his bed, rubbing a hand over his face. Previously yearning for peace and a break from duty, he realized there would be no refusing Seraphine. His decision crystallized before he even acknowledged it fully, knowing at dawn he would head to the Chantry. As dawn approached, the sun was barely visible through the hazy sky while Ronan walked through the twisting streets of Denerim. The city was ever bustling with life in the early morning, yet it retained a semblance of stillness. Caught in that time between wakefulness and slumber, where people hurried either to begin their day or return home from nocturnal escapades. Their voices were muffled beneath the fog, enveloping the cobblestones. Turning onto a broader paved street, he found the marketplace already stirring to life. Merchants arranged their stalls, displaying tightly tied bundles of elf fruit and embryum alongside jars of blended felindaries. Further along, a blacksmith exhibited freshly forged blades gleaming with the distinct sheen of silverite. The enticing aroma of spiced lamb and druff sausages drifted toward him, igniting hunger in his stomach. A nearby stand sold luxuriously dyed silks from Tevinter that fluttered beautifully in the breeze. Yet Ronan kept a steady pace as he approached the alienage, the quarter of Denerim designated for the city's elven population, set apart from the rest of the city by crumbling walls and battered gates. The alienage was quiet compared to the marketplace, where elves hurried past with downcast expressions, burdened by the weight of their struggles and survival. Catching the eye of a weary, elderly elven woman, Ronan nodded in greeting while she struggled with a basket full of produce as she moved toward one of the makeshift stalls. Though she responded in kind, her expression remained cautious, an epitome of the simmering tension between the human and elven populations in Denerim. As he continued toward the towering spire of the Chantry, its gleaming white stone dominated the skyline. The high arches and sculpted windows pulled his gaze upward toward the Maker's grace. Pausing for a moment, his eyes traced the lines of the grand structure, memories stirring within him. It had been years since he'd stepped foot inside a Chantry, life taking him away to the depths of the deep roads, vast wildernesses, and blood-spattered battlefields. Yet here he stood, drawn back to this place by a letter from someone he once thought lost to time. Taking a deep breath, he stepped up to the main entrance. The smell of incense greeted him as he crossed the threshold, the interior bathed in soft morning light that filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colors on the stone floor. Tapestries adorned the walls, narrating the story of Andraste and the Maker. a familiar sight to anyone raised under the teachings of the Chantry. Seraphina awaited him in the garden, just as she had written in her letter. He made his way through the long hallways, the soft murmur of prayer filling the air and punctuated only by the distant sound of footsteps. The garden, nestled within the Chantry's central courtyard, blossomed with lush greenery. The blossoms cultivated here thriving in the safety of this sanctum. Standing beneath the archway of ivy, Seraphine wore the simple robes of her order. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, but her pale face and the signs of worry etched deeply into her features revealed the immense weight she carried. Upon spotting him, her expression softened, relief flashing in her eyes. "Ronan," she called out, stepping forward. "I worried you might not come." "Oh, would I would," he replied, offering her a small smile. "Ah, it's been far too long, Seraphine." "And fun." She nodded, her gaze falling momentarily before meeting his once more. In their shared silence, memories of their past came rushing back like a bridge over the years since their separation. "I desperately need your help," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Her eyes darted around as if fearful that someone could overhear. "The Apprentices. They've been sneaking out at night, and I cannot discover where they go. Their beds lie empty for me each time I check on them, and they return exhausted and preoccupied at the crack of dawn. I fear they've stumbled into something inscrutable, something dangerous." Ronan's brows knitted together in concern as he absorbed her plight. Her description of the apprentice's behavior stoked a flame of worry within him. "This sounds serious," he said finally. "I'll help you. Together we can discover where they are going. But we must be discreet." Seraphine's shoulders relaxed slightly, and a sigh of relief escaped her lips. "I didn't know who else to turn to," she admitted. Ronan offered a reassuring smile. She forced a small laugh, though the concern still lingered in her eyes. "I'm in your debt for this, Ronan." "You already are," he teased lightly, remembering how he had once covered for her when she snuck out to meet a traveling bard. The memory igniting a mischievous grin on her face that flushed ever so slightly. "Let's find out where your apprentices have been wandering off to," he said, and upon exiting the Chantry, the weight of Seraphine's anxieties bore down on him. Though it seemed a straightforward enough task, something about the unfolding situation ignited unease within him. The secrecy surrounding the apprentices' absences, compounded by their nocturnal excursions, felt precarious, especially considering their youth, their ages ranging from 15 summers and down, still brimming with childlike enthusiasm and questions about the world. But they were also testing the boundaries of the rigid Chantry rules, leading Ronan to ponder what could compel children to such endeavors. As he strode through the busy streets of Denerim, thoughts churned, devising a plan instead of confronting the apprentices head-on. After all, if they recognized him as a Grey Warden, they might vanish before he could reveal the reasons behind their absences. Steering into a clothing shop tucked away between two larger buildings, familiar and quaint, he procured a simple garb to help him blend in. Inside, the shopkeeper, an elderly gentleman with a thinning beard offered a friendly greeting. "Ah, Sir Warden, what brings you here today?" Ronan leaned closer to the counter. "I'm looking for something modest and durable. I need to blend in, not stand out." The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow, but nodded, leading him to a section of simpler garments. He examined a rough-spun wool tunic and a matching hood large enough to cast his face in shadow. "Perfect for my needs," he stated, picking them off the rack along with gloves and a well-worn prayer book he found nearby. He thanked the shopkeeper, paying generously with a handful of sovereigns before slipping back into the streets with a low hood casting a shadow over his face, feeling more like a weary traveler than the renowned Grey Warden. Upon arriving back at the Chantry, the sun had descended further into the horizon, welcoming evening. He entered through the main doors, his head lowered with the prayer book hanging from his belt. The recitative chant of light echoed through the hall as he seated himself in the back of the room, listening intently as the reader spoke serenely of the Maker's first children and their jealousy. From his vantage, his eyes roamed toward the group of apprentices seated at the front. There were 5 of them, 3 boys and 2 girls, all donning pale robes. Youthful exuberance remained in their faces, yet there was a shared demeanor that showcased impatience or a daze of despair. One of the boys, sandy-haired and hardly 14, kept casting glances toward the entrance and bouncing impatiently. The others shared glances, their senses sharpened by the tension in the air. When the reading concluded, the apprentices hurriedly slipped out through a side door, prompting Ronan to rise slowly, lingering near the back as the congregation trickled out. He urged himself to follow them with deliberate silence, allowing the shadows to veil his figure from view. Yet as he exited through the chapel door, he found his quarry had already vanished, leaving him only an empty courtyard. The stillness should have been comforting, but he felt increasingly uneasy about the intentions of these apprentices. The evening air felt thick with apprehension as Ronan circled back to his home, mind racing at all he had learned. He briefly contemplated using Rook to track them, considering the legendary hound's keen sense of smell, but quickly realized that a Mabari warhound sniffing around within the Chantry would raise too many eyebrows. Subtlety would be key, and provided a different approach. Moving to his work table, he carefully accessed a small pouch containing fine lyrium dust, encased in its shimmering blue hue. He gathered various other ingredients from the shelves, shelf fruit harvested from the wilds of Falden and a handful of dark embryum petals. Preparing for an elixir he had concocted from his Grey Warden training, mixed with herbalist knowledge, gained over the years. Though it would heighten his senses, heightening one's perception often carried risks, sentiments he recognized from his earlier experiences. Regardless, tonight felt necessary. It would make deciphering their secrets undeniably easier. Gently, he ground the elf root and embryum into a fine paste, allowing the earthy aroma to fill the room. He sprinkled in the lyrium dust, watching it twinkle and shimmer as magic threaded through it. Holding the vial up to the dim light, its liquid glistened eerily, alive. Ronan knew it was time, and with resolute act, uncorked the vial, allowing the sharp, bitter taste to wash over his tongue, settling into a peculiar buzz deep within his chest. Instantly, he felt his senses sharpened to an unnatural intensity. the faintest draft through the cracked window, the soft murmurs of the distant street outside, even picking up the subtle shifts of air around Rook as the hound remained nestled near the hearth. With a deep breath, he settled onto his bed, allowing himself to rest lightly, even while heightened. Tomorrow, he would embark on the search for the apprentices. The following day, sunlight poured through his window, catching him off guard as Ronan leapt from bed, a jolt of shock piercing through him. He fell to the floor, both blindsided and disoriented. Balancing his senses, he realized that his heightened perception was far too intense. The scents and sounds that usually brought him joy felt overwhelming. Standing against the wall, he peeked through the door back toward Rook, whose breath carried the aroma of fresh meat. "By the Maker," he exclaimed, laughing humorously at the absurdity of it all. Stepping out onto the streets of Denirum, he felt increasingly better with every passing moment. Every little noise spurred clarity and insight, despite how intense the day began. He made his way toward the apprentices' living quarters to see if he could uncover any clues while they engaged in their daily activities. Moments later, he nearly collided with a chicken escaping from nowhere, flapping wildly as it burst forth from a nearby butcher's cart, squawking dramatically. The noise pierced his heightened senses, nearly causing him to trip. Ducking and evading the chaotic bird, Ronan, reaching the quieter area where the apprentices stayed, he crouched quietly amongst the underbrush. A slim trail of sweat and ink wafted through an open window. Easing himself through the narrow gap, he shifted from the shrubbery, keeping a low profile and observing the common space. The area had its modest offerings: low beds, basic wooden chests. But the personal touches seized his attention. One bed held a half-finished embroidery project draped over it, a needle firmly lodged in the fabric. Another was neatly arranged, with a wooden griffin carving perched atop a nightstand. Scanning the room, he discerned a crumpled robe tossed carelessly over the back of a chair, its sleeves trailing over the floor's surface, alongside a cold cup of still tea. The apprentices had clearly lived here, yet it was on the far side of the room where Ronan's gaze settled on a weathered leather-bound journal, its cover worn from prolonged usage. A quill, still sticky with ink, lay nearby, having also seen its share of activity. Curiosity pierced through him as he thumbed through the pages, brows knitting closer. The familiar verses of the Chant of Light intermingled with the musings of a restless youth. Expressions of longing for freedom and a sense of a greater world beyond reached out to him, embodying all the youthful restlessness he once had as an apprentice. Flipping through the pages, he noted the entries growing frantic. Emerging from Gareth's pen was a sense of questioning, doubt against the Chantry's teachings. As Ronan read deeper, he felt a potential danger rise. This wasn't the typical discontentment of young apprentices. These were serious thoughts that could lead them down. Ronan closed the journal gently, returning it to its place. He understood now that this wasn't merely a case of rebellious youths sneaking off for mischief. There were deeper implications at play here. Beliefs questioning the very foundation of authority itself. He needed to keep this to himself as a precaution and heed caution. He had already learned too much to turn back now. Retaining his anonymity, he circled back to the garden, taking an oak bench and camouflaging himself behind the fountain. He settled into quiet anticipation, knowing the apprentices would soon follow their routine. At the side entrance of the Chantry, Ronan noticed 3 apprentices creep out through the door, their heads spinning nervously, hurrying toward the staircase leading into the crypts below. Ronan straightened, slipping from the shadows to follow with caution, his steps quiet as a whisper, with promised intent. The apprentices hurried down the stairs, their excitement evident as they ventured into the dark, musty confines that lay beneath the Chantry. Upon penetrating the crypt, the eerie silence enveloped him, only disturbed by the faint glow of flickering candlelight. After following down the cloistered stairway, the crypt opened wide, revealing coffins sprawled against the walls, each one marked with fading names and dates. While studying the stone-carved runes etched into the entrance wall ahead, he noticed a coffin unmarked, suggesting no memory had long left this place. He approached closer. Something within seemed unusual. It bore no body, but instead, its lid was slightly ajar, perhaps carelessly moved, revealing a narrow tunnel leading deeper into the crypt. Ronan kept a steady breath as he reached for the iron poker he found abandoned on the floor. With a gentle nudge of the poker, he opened the coffin's lid farther, revealing the dark tunnel's entrance. Likely where the apprentices had ventured. With worries of smuggling and dark cults lingering in his mind, he hesitated at the mouth of the tunnel. The potential danger ignited memories of battles past. Yet he had to press forward, knowing time was of the essence. Slipping into the dark passageway, he advanced carefully, feeling the damp, mossy coolness in the air that surrounded him. Moments later, deep within the foul stench of the underground tunnel, Ronan encountered the sudden rustling of movement behind him. Before he could react, he swung around, raising the iron poker instinctively. Foaming black eyes loomed in the shadows behind him. A giant rat, larger than any he had previously encountered, sent a pulse of alarm racing through his body. Without hesitation, the rat lunged for him, teeth bared and claws poised to strike. He sidestepped its feral charge, bringing the poker down with precision to pierce its side. Despite its size, the creature moved quicker than he anticipated, thrashing violently. But Ronan held fast, delivering one final strike until it fell and lay still at his feet. Breathing heavily, Ronan left the poker embedded in the creature, witnessing how its blood splattered ominously onto the stone floor, the metallic tang encroaching on his awareness. Surveying his surroundings for further danger, he pressed onward through the hidden passages. The nighttime air remained still when he emerged from the sewers, blinking against the dimness above. He noticed the lingering smell of decay fade slightly into a softer atmosphere of forgotten memories. The buildings here were old, leaning toward one another, their facades chipped and in need of care. Yet it was unmistakably the alienage, the shadows of Algernon's past, hidden away from the brighter parts of Denerim. Yet a faint sound reached his ears, a melody drifting from a worn warehouse nearby, echoing the forgotten warmth of life. Daring closer, Ronan pried open a broken window, stealthily climbing inside, rolling low as he hit the floor, catching an unexpected light filtering in, illuminating a gathering. Shadows danced as he drew closer, revealing a beautifully adorned space, decorated with makeshift tents and the faint aroma of life, where laughter, music, and camaraderie filled the air. An assemblage of elves, dwarves, and humans, sharing stories over ale and games, benching out the heavy weight that usually loomed over them in the city. Ronan watched, intrigued over the sight. A table of Chantry apprentices sat with a young dwarf playing a lively card game, their laughter spilling into the atmosphere fluidly. The friendship and ease he observed paused a sense of hope within him. These were no longer the shadowy figures he had sought to confront, but rather young souls seeking acceptance amid a world fraught with division and strife. Retaining his watch, he glanced back, configuring a safe angle as the Templar's footsteps echoed in the corridor. Emerging around the corner, he shifted his stance into authority, arms crossed casually while avoiding detection. "Sir Templar," Ronan addressed him, his voice imbued with an air of tranquility. "What brings you to this less traveled path?" The Templar halted, his eyes narrowing beneath the helm. "I'm tracking a group of rogue apostates believed to be lurking nearby. I suspect they're hiding in this district." "Here?" Ronan remarked, an eyebrow raised. "You've been misinformed. Best you seek out the Korari wilds." The Templar hesitated, wrestling with the weight of Ronan's authority, uncertainty flickering on his visage before he turned away. "Very well, Warden. I will leave this to you," he responded curtly, moving away reluctantly. With an exhalation of relief, Ronan allowed himself another glance before returning through the narrow streets of the alien age, the noise of the tavern reaching his ears welcomingly. Approaching the North Noble Tavern, now dimmed by the beginning of day, he noticed figures scavenging about inside. The door swung open to welcoming voices and the bustle of life. Entering and calling forth comfort in the midst of the transition from dusk to dawn, he absorbed the sights and sensations within the tavern. As he settled down at a table, quietly reflecting, the conversations around him broke apart, yet blended together into background noise. Life surged forth, the pulse of Denerim ever present and breathing, full of stories to be told, of battles fought and victories earned. Soon after, Seraphine entered too, her gaze darting around anxiously before locking onto Ronan's. With uncertain anticipation, she approached the table. "Please?" "Well?" she inquired, eyes eager for answers. Ronan leaned back, a smile gracing his features, humor hiding beneath layers of calm. His smile remained present. Seraphine's brow raised, skepticism washing over her as she processed his response. "Harmless escapades? In the crypts?" Pax leaned back with an indulgent grin. "Oh, you should join us sometime. They're likely just being curious and recklessly youthful. We were similar once, weren't we?" A small sigh escaped Seraphine, her tension beginning to ease as she remembered. And I suppose we were. Rest assured, they're fine, Ronan affirmed, nodding softly. So long as they aren't causing any genuine harm, far be it for us to judge. Seraphine permitted herself a small, relieved smile, trusting in Ronan's words. "All right," she said at last, leaning back in her chair, a semblance of ease settling into her posture. "I'll take your word for it." And with that, they parted ways for the evening, promising to keep in touch. As sunlight broke the skyline, Ronan quietly walked away, heart lighter than it had been, a burgeoning hope aligning his thoughts. From that point onward, the tales continued in full bloom, ranging from barroom rumors to legends immortalized in time. The dough and anvil was alive with laughter and adventure, and the keg of Cal bronze had become a centerpiece for gatherings, to be treasured. And my dear friends, this is where tonight's storytelling draws to an end. I hope you all found enjoyment in our journey together. Until next time, may your dreams be sweet, stay safe, and always maintain a few health potions at the ready.